Texas dust swirled with a hot wind, clinging to skin, sweat, and soul. But the dust that weighed the heaviest was the kind kicked up by the polished boots of General Harrison Bennett and his 10 soldiers. They stood before Elias Holt's home, a humble structure of wood and faith built with his own hands. The air smelled of dry earth and fear. At the center of it all, the general held a 10-year-old boy, Luke McKinney, by the arm, his grip as strong as if he were holding a rebellious animal. The boy wasn't crying. His face was streaked with dried tears, his eyes fixed on Elias, who stood on the porch. Elias's chest rose and fell, a slow, heavy bellows. Each breath was a battle to contain the fury that threatened to explode and consume everything. He held no weapon. His hands, calloused from plow and seed, were clenched at his sides. They were hands of a cultivator, not a killer. General Bennett, on the other hand, was a man forged for destruction. His blue and gold uniform was an affront to the brown and ochre landscape of that land. His face was smooth, unmarked by the sun that told the story of the men there. He didn't belong in that place, and therefore he considered himself its owner. This land, Mr. Holt, has been re-annexed by government order. It is military property now, Bennett said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He pulled Luke harder, and a low whimper escaped the boy's lips. You have until sunset to gather your belongings and those of this orphan you. Harbor. After that, any man found here will be considered an intruder. Elias felt his blood boil. Orphan? The general used the word like an insult, as if the absence of parents made Luke's life less valuable. Elias had taken the boy in when his parents were taken by fever 2 years prior. He had promised them on their deathbeds that Luke would never be alone. That promise was as sacred as the land beneath his feet, land that held the graves of his wife, Martha, and his own parents. A quick flashback, a ghost of a memory, assailed Elias. Years ago, he and Martha sat on that very porch, gazing at the stars. This land isn't ours, Elias, she had said, with the quiet wisdom he so loved. We are merely its caretakers for those who come after, for our children, for their children. The memory hit him like a blow. He was failing her. He was failing Luke. He had seen the signs. Months earlier, government men had passed through measuring lands, speaking of progress and national security. They offered a pittance which Elias refused. He wouldn't sell his wife's grave. Then came the veiled threats, the inexplicable taxes, the subtle pressure. He had ignored them, believing in justice, in decency. He had believed that the same flag that promised freedom would not be used to steal it. What foolishness! Corruption had arrived, dressed in an immaculate uniform, and contempt in its eyes. Let the boy go, General. Elias's voice came out lower and more dangerous than he expected. It was not a request. It was a command from a deep place, a place where honor and pain met. Bennett smiled, a thin, cruel smile. The boy? He's merely a guarantee that you won't do anything foolish. Men like you, clinging to this dirt like weeds, sometimes need an incentive. He yanked Luke again, dragging him toward the gate. The boy stumbled. Elias's dignity shattered. Seeing innocence treated with such brutality was the final spark. He took a step forward, his body taut, ready to launch himself at the general even if it meant death. 10 rifles rose, aimed at his chest. The world seemed to stop. The wind ceased. The only sound was Luke's ragged breath. And then, from the path leading to the main road, a voice cut through the silence, a voice that seemed to carry the weight of the hills and the wisdom of the rivers. A general of your caliber, Bennett, measuring strength with a boy? I thought your battles were grander. Everyone turned. Every soldier, the general, and Elias himself, standing by the wooden gate with the afternoon sun at his back, was a man, tall, clad in buckskin, his rifle resting on his shoulder as if it were part of his body. His face was familiar from every legend, every campfire, every Texan hope. Davy Crockett. He didn't look like a ghost, but a fact, an undeniable and dangerous fact. The general's grip on Luke's arm loosened instantly. The soldiers lowered their rifles, not by order, but by a reflex of astonishment and, perhaps, shame. The air, once heavy with threat, was now charged with a different electricity. It was the presence of an authority that came not from rank or decree, but from the very soil of Texas. Crockett took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Bennett. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply spoke. "The law may give you the deed to the land, General, but honor is something earned, and today you seem to be losing yours." Bennett, pale, shoved Luke toward Elias. The boy ran and clung to the legs of the man he called father. The general adjusted his tunic, attempting to regain his composure. "Crockett, I thought you were in the capital." "The capital is everywhere a Texan needs help," Crockett replied, his gaze never wavering. "This land still has an owner, and his name is written in sweat and tears, not in the ink of an unjust decree. Leave, General. Return when you have learned the difference between power and justice." For a long moment, no one moved. General Bennett looked at Crockett, then at Elias, who now shielded Luke with his body. There was hatred in the general's eyes, a silent promise of retaliation. But in that moment, he was defeated. Crockett's presence was a force of nature he could not contend with. Without another word, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away, his men following him like a shamed pack. Crockett watched them disappear into the dust. Then he turned to Elias. He merely nodded, a gesture of respect between men who understood the value of the land. And as silently as he appeared, he was gone, melting into the trail like a legend returning to its place in time. Elias stood there, holding Luke, his heart pounding. He knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The general would return, but something within Elias had changed forever. Fury had given way to a cold calm, a resolution forged in the fire of humiliation. As the sun set, painting the sky with the colors of a bruise, the wind carried a whisper, not of a man, but of Texas itself. If you believe an ordinary man cannot stand up to power, wait and see what happens when a father's honor is wounded. The days that followed were a silent war, a slow torture designed to break Elias Holt's spirit. General Bennett was a man who did not forget a humiliation, and his revenge came not with the sound of gunfire, but with the suffocating silence of isolation. He camped his detachment less than a mile from Elias's ranch, a constant menacing presence on the horizon. The first thing they did was divert the small stream that fed the property. The water, which once ran clear and generous, was reduced to a muddy trickle. Elias's corn crops, his and Luke's sustenance for the winter, began to yellow under the relentless sun. Bennett didn't stop there. He imposed a military protection fee on all the settlers in the region, but Elias's was 10 times higher than the others. In town, the general's soldiers spread rumors. They said Elias Holt was a Comanche sympathizer, a traitor who corresponded with Texas enemies. That Crockett's visit wasn't a coincidence, but a planned meeting between two conspirators. People, once friends, began to look away. The store owner, who had always sold him on credit, now demanded cash up front. In church on Sunday, the pew where he and Luke sat remained empty around them. The community, poisoned by fear, had abandoned him. Elias felt the weight of every stare, of every closed door. Injustice was no longer a singular act, but a poison, spreading through his life, contaminating all he held dear. Luke fell ill. A fever consumed him, the result of the dirty water they were forced to drink from a nearly dry well. Elias spent his nights on vigil, placing cool cloths on the boy's forehead, his heart squeezed by a gnawing impotence. On one of those desperate nights, he sat on the porch. The ranch plunged into near total darkness. The moon was hidden. He remembered another time, a hot summer day when he was just a boy. He stood in the middle of a crowd in San Antonio, listening to a man speak of freedom. The man was Davy Crockett. He didn't speak like a politician with bombastic words and empty promises. He spoke like a neighbor, like a father. Elias never forgot what he'd said that day, his voice echoing over the dusty square. A man's strength is not in the rifle he carries, nor in the size of his land. It is in the word he gives and the promise he keeps. Texas was not built by generals and palaces, but by common men who refused to bow. That memory, dormant for years, ignited a flame within him. He was not just fighting for a patch of dirt. He was fighting for the promise he made to his deceased wife to care for that land, for the promise he made to Luke's parents to protect him, for the silent promise every Texan made to himself to live free or die trying. He would not bow. Meanwhile, in the military camp, General Bennett drank imported wine in his lavish tent, laughing with his officers. For him, this was a game, an exercise of power. Breaking that stubborn farmer had become an obsession. "He's like an old, stubborn oak," Bennett would say, swirling his glass. "But even the strongest oak falls when its roots are cut. And the roots of a man like Holt are water, food, and the respect of his neighbors. We've cut them all. It's only a matter of time before he comes crawling." What the general in his arrogance failed to see was that humiliation and suffering were not breaking Elias. They were forging him into something new. Pain was transforming into patience, anger into observation. By day, he worked twice as hard, digging a new well with his own hands, searching for groundwater. And by night, when Luke slept, he did not rest. He watched. With the precision of a hunter studying his prey, Elias began to map Bennett's camp routine. He learned the guard changed times. He noticed that the supply wagon coming from town always arrived on Tuesdays by the same dusty, poorly guarded road. And he noticed something crucial. Every night, a messenger left the camp riding east. The same man, the same horse, the same time. He didn't look like an ordinary soldier. He carried a locked leather bag, which he treated with reverent care. One night, hidden behind a rocky outcrop, Elias watched the messenger stop to water his horse at a small stream. The man dismounted, left the leather bag on the saddle, and stepped away for a moment. It was weakness. It was an opening. Elias didn't know what he would do yet, but a plan began to form in his mind. Not a plan of violence, but of intelligence. "A man's strength is in the word he gives," Crockett had said. But Elias was discovering that sometimes strength also lay in the word one intercepts. Every humiliation suffered had planted something new within him, a seed of resistance that grew stronger than fear. General Bennett, in his power game, believed he was cornering a wounded animal. He didn't know that by stepping onto that ranch and threatening that boy, he had just awakened the wrong kind of man, the kind of man Texas produced in times of tyranny. Elias Holt's silence was mistaken for defeat. In town, people whispered that he had finally broken, that he would soon abandon the land. General Bennett, satisfied, relaxed his vigilance, convinced his war of attrition was won. This was exactly what Elias had hoped for. Cunning, he had learned, flourished in the shadow of underestimation. He didn't act in haste. A farmer knows the value of patience, of preparing the soil before planting the seed. His seed was justice, and the soil was his enemy's arrogance. His first step was to seek out the only person in town who had not turned her back on him, Adeline Sullivan Caldwell, a widow with a steady gaze and few words, owner of the only cantina that still served drinks to the common soldiers. Adeline's husband, a sergeant, had been executed on Bennett's orders, accused of insubordination for questioning an order that would have resulted in the unnecessary deaths of his men. Adeline didn't cry in public. Instead, she turned her grief into a cold, sharp observation. She saw in Elias the same injustice that had taken her husband. "They talk a lot when they drink," she told Elias one evening when he sought her out in the back of the cantina under the pretense of buying kerosene. "They talk about the general, about the gold he keeps in his chest, about the letters he sends to politicians in the capital." "Letters," Elias repeated. "I need to know when the next important messenger leaves and where he's going." Adeline merely nodded. She was his ally, an alliance forged not in promises, but in shared pain. 3 days later, she sent him a message through a delivery boy. The Hawk flies at dawn on Thursday, heading to San Antonio. On Thursday morning, Elias was not on his ranch. He was hidden in a narrow ravine that cut across the road to San Antonio, a shortcut only locals knew. He hadn't prepared a violent ambush. Instead, he used what he knew best, the land. During the night, he dug a shallow trench and covered it with branches and dust, creating a subtle trap. When the general's messenger passed at high speed, the horse stumbled, throwing the rider to the ground. The man hit his head and remained unconscious. Elias approached carefully. He didn't touch the soldier, only the leather bag that had fallen beside him. It was locked. With a tool he used to mend fences, he forced the lock. Inside, there were no military orders, but something far more valuable, a ledger and a series of letters. They were the proof. The ledger detailed, in meticulous handwriting, all the lands Bennett had confiscated in the government's name, but which he was actually reselling to foreign speculators, pocketing the profit. The letters were to his accomplices in the capital, detailing the bribes and the division of the spoils. Elias Holt's name was there, the next property on the list to be sold. He didn't steal the documents. With a piece of charcoal and paper he had brought, he spent the next hour copying the most crucial information: names, dates, amounts. He copied enough to expose the scheme, but left the originals. His plan was not to become a thief, but a bearer of truth. Before dawn, he placed the documents back in the bag, closed it as best he could, and left it beside the soldier, who began to groan, regaining consciousness. Elias disappeared into the darkness, the copies secure in his coat. His next small victory was against the camp itself. Using Adeline's information about the supply wagon's routine, he found the spot where the wagon bringing the general's food and wine stopped for the horses to rest. One night, he crept there and swapped 2 sacks of salt for 2 identical sacks filled with sand. It wasn't much, but it was a blow to the general's morale and comfort. The next day, Adeline told him Bennett exploded in fury, humiliated before his officers for having his food ruined. These were small victories like raindrops on a dry land, but they were enough to nurture hope. Elias felt the tide beginning to turn. He was no longer just reacting, he was acting. He was no longer the prey, he was the hunter. With the evidence in hand, he knew he needed more than truth. He needed an authority that Bennett could not intimidate. With Adeline's help, he sent one of the copies to a magistrate in San Antonio, a man known for his integrity and his contempt for military corruption. The letter was sent not by an official messenger, but by an old cowboy making the cattle route, a man invisible to power. General Bennett, ignorant of all this, saw only the silence of Holt's ranch. He laughed, toasted his imminent victory, sure that the farmer had finally given up. Little did he know that silence was not the sound of surrender. In Texas, silence was simply the sound that came before the shot of justice. General Harrison Bennett's patience finally ran out. The small humiliations, the salty food, the whispers of discontent among his men, and above all, Elias Holt's stubborn, silent presence on his land, gnawed at his arrogance until it turned into blind fury. He decided the charade was over. At dawn, he himself would lead a squad to the ranch, arrest Holt for treason, and hang him from the tallest tree as an example to any other who dared defy him. It would be a spectacle of power, swift and brutal. As the first rays of sun touched the hills, Bennett and 20 of his most loyal men rode toward the ranch. The morning mist still hung over the fields, creating a spectral atmosphere. The general expected to find a terrified man, perhaps attempting a desperate escape. Instead, what he found made him halt his horse abruptly. The scene was surreal. In front of the house, Elias Holt stood unarmed, with Luke by his side. But he was not alone. In a silent semicircle behind him were 15, 20 other farmers and their families. Men and women who had previously avoided him were now there, their faces hardened by resolve. They carried no rifles, only the tools of their trade: hoes, sickles, axes. And in the center of that unlikely crowd, sitting in a rocking chair on Elias's porch, as if he had been there all his life, was a middle-aged man, dressed in the sober clothes of a magistrate. It was Magistrate William Coleman Langley from San Antonio. Bennett's face contorted into a mask of confusion and rage. "Magistrate, what are you doing here? This is a military operation." Langley rose slowly, a roll of papers in his hand. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the law. "I have been informed of grave crimes committed against the citizens of this territory, General. Crimes of extortion, embezzlement, and land theft, perpetrated under the guise of military authority." Bennett laughed, a harsh, joyless sound. "Ridiculous accusations, coming from this traitor," he spat, pointing at Elias. "They don't come from him, General. They come from here," Elias said, and for the first time his voice rang out, clear and strong over the field. He took a step forward, holding the ledger he had intercepted. "This is your book, in your handwriting, detailing every acre stolen, every peso diverted." The silence that followed was absolute. Bennett's soldiers looked from the book to their commander's pale face. The trust in their eyes began to waver. They were soldiers, not the henchmen of a thief. "This is a farce, a forged document!" Bennett shouted, his voice a pitch higher, bordering on desperation. "Then perhaps you can explain the letters you sent to Senator Wallace in San Antonio," the magistrate continued, unrolling one of the papers Elias had copied. He began to read aloud, the letter detailing a scheme to sell the river water to a mining company, leaving all the ranches in the region dry. At that moment, one of the farmers, an old man named Amos Ford, stepped forward. "My well ran dry a month ago. I had to sacrifice half my herd. You told me it was a drought, General." Another woman, Hazel Rowe, spoke next, her voice trembling with rage. "You took my brother's land, said it was for a defense fort. Now we know you sold it for 30 pieces of gold. One by one, the farmers began to speak. Their voices, once silenced by fear, united in a chorus of accusation. Bennett's arrogance dissolved, replaced by a growing panic. He looked to his men, seeking support, but they stared back at him with contempt. He had betrayed them as much as the settlers. In a last act of desperation, Bennett drew his pistol. "Traitors, all of you! You will be hanged!" But before he could aim the weapon, Elias moved, not with the speed of a gunslinger, but with the unyielding strength of a man protecting his home. He didn't try to disarm the general. Instead, he stood between the gun and Luke, his body a shield. "You can shoot me, General," Elias said, his gaze steady, "but you cannot shoot the truth." That act of courage was the breaking point. Two of Bennett's sergeants advanced, and with a reluctance that quickly turned to duty, took the pistol from their commander's hand. The general offered no resistance. His power, built on fear and lies, had evaporated under the morning sun. Magistrate Langley stepped forward. "General Harrison Bennett, you are under arrest for crimes against the people of Texas." As he was led away, handcuffed, Bennett passed Elias. His eyes, now devoid of any authority, searched for an expression of triumph on the farmer's face, but there was none. Elias had already turned, his eyes fixed on his land, on the corn that now had a chance to grow. Justice for him was not about the downfall of an enemy, but about the chance to rebuild. When the gathered crowd at the ranch saw the general being led away like a common criminal, no one cheered or shouted. In a spontaneous and powerful gesture, the men simply removed their hats, not to the fallen general, but in respect to the quiet man who had proven that true strength doesn't come from the barrel of a gun, but from the courage to stand for the truth. A year later, Elias Holt's ranch breathed life again. The stream ran free, its waters singing the song of perseverance. The corn grew tall and green, and Luke, now 11, ran through the fields, his laughter echoing through the valley. Peace had returned, not a fragile, fearful peace, but a peace earned with dignity, a peace with deep roots in the land. Elias worked from dawn till dusk, his hands once again immersed in the soil he loved so much. The scars of the ordeal had not disappeared from his soul, but they had transformed. They were no longer marks of pain, but reminders of his own strength. The community, once divided by fear, was now united. Neighbors helped each other with the harvest, shared bread, and celebrated life's small victories together. Elias was not seen as a war hero, but as something more important, a pillar of integrity, a man who had shown them that justice could be cultivated just like the land. Adeline Sullivan Caldwell became a frequent visitor, bringing apple pies and news from town. Their friendship, born of adversity, blossomed into mutual, quiet respect. Together, they represented the resilience of a people who refused to be broken. As for General Harrison Bennett, the news that arrived was scarce and grim. He was tried in San Antonio. The evidence was irrefutable. Stripped of his rank, his honor, and his freedom, he was sentenced to a life of hard labor in a distant military prison. His name, once synonymous with power, became a shameful footnote in the territory's history, a warning about the fragility of tyranny. He was not defeated in a duel at sunset, but in a courtroom by the truth he so despised. One autumn afternoon, Elias and Luke sat on the porch, the same one where it all began. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the landscape. "Dad," said Luke, who had long since started calling Elias that, "do you think Crockett will ever come back?" Elias smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "He never left, son. Men like him don't just live in a body, they live in the wind that blows free across these plains. They live in every man who refuses to bow his head. He was here today when Mr. Ford helped us fix the fence. He was here yesterday when Mrs. Adeline brought medicine for your horse. The spirit of Texas isn't one person, it's the courage of all of us together. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, his gaze lost on the horizon. He had finally understood. The true victory wasn't arresting the general, it was proving that a man, armed only with truth and love for his home, could face an army and win. It was teaching a boy that honor is worth more than life, and that land does not belong to those who conquer it with a sword, but to those who cultivate it with their hands. The general tried to destroy that simple man, but in the end, he only destroyed himself. In Texas, true vengeance is not seeing the enemy fall. It is living free and in peace while he lives forever bound by the chains of his own past. If you were moved by Elias Holt's story of courage and justice, please subscribe to our channel. Stories like this remind us that the fight for freedom and honor is universal. Share this video with everyone who is proud of their roots and their land, especially those who carry Mexican pride in their hearts, because the battle for dignity knows no borders. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to know how far the spirit of Texas has reached.